We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening aren't subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 20,000 subscribers, so please be a legend and smash the subscribe button. And like this video, it will really help support us. Thank you so much.
When I first met Mindy, she seemed like the perfect girlfriend. Smart, funny, and gorgeous. I couldn't believe my luck. Our first few dates were amazing, and I was really starting to fall for her. But then things got weird. It started small. We'd be out at dinner, and I'd spot Mindy's best friend, Jenna, at a nearby table. Or we'd go to a movie, and Jenna would coincidentally be there too. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mindy and Jenna had been friends since childhood, so it made sense they'd hang out in the same places. But it kept happening. Every single time we went out, Jenna was always there, watching us from afar. When I mentioned it to Mindy, she just laughed it off. Oh, that's just Jenna being protective. She's always been like that with my boyfriends. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but it was hard to ignore the way Jenna glared at me whenever she saw us together. Her eyes would narrow, and she'd get this twisted look on her face. It was unsettling. Things escalated quickly after that. One day, Mindy got an anonymous text warning her that I was cheating. It was a total lie, but Mindy was upset. I managed to convince her it wasn't true, but the seed of doubt had been planted. More anonymous messages followed. Some accused me of having a secret family. Others claimed I was a con artist with multiple identities. It was ridiculous, but Mindy was getting more and more paranoid. I started noticing a black car following me around town. At first, I thought I was being paranoid too. But then I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was Jenna. She was literally stalking me. I confronted Mindy about it, but she refused to believe her best friend would do something like that. We had our first big fight, and I stormed out of her apartment. As I walked to my car, I felt someone watching me. I turned around just in time to see Jenna duck behind a nearby tree. It was beyond creepy. The final straw came when I woke up one morning to find all 4 of my car tires slashed. There was a note on the windshield that said, "Stay away from Mindy or else." I knew it had to be Jenna, but I had no proof. I was at my wit's end. I really cared about Mindy, but I couldn't deal with her psycho friend anymore. I decided to do some digging to see if I could find out what Jenna's deal was. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. I talked to some of Mindy's exes, and they all had similar stories. Jenna had terrorized every guy Mindy had ever dated. She'd go to insane lengths to break them up. Everything from spreading vicious rumors to outright mess. But why? The answer came from Mindy's college roommate. Apparently, Jenna had been in love with Mindy for years. She confessed her feelings back in high school, but Mindy didn't feel the same way. Jenna never got over it. Instead of moving on, Jenna became obsessed. She couldn't stand to see Mindy with anyone else, so she made it her mission to destroy all of Mindy's relationships. And she'd been scarily successful. Mindy had never dated anyone for more than a few months. I was shocked. How could Mindy not see what was really going on? I realized Jenna must have been manipulating her for years, playing on her insecurities and twisting every situation to her advantage. It was seriously messed up. I knew I had to tell Mindy the truth, but I was worried she wouldn't believe me. Jenna had been her best friend for so long. Would she really take my word over hers? I decided to gather as much evidence as I could before confronting Mindy. I set up a hidden camera in my apartment and invited Jenna over, pretending I wanted to clear the air between us. It didn't take long for her true colors to show. On camera, Jenna admitted to everything. The anonymous messages, the stalking, the tire slashing. She ranted about how Mindy belonged with her and how she'd never let anyone else have her. It was disturbing to watch. When I showed Mindy the video, she was devastated. She couldn't believe her best friend had betrayed her like that. It was hard to watch her world come crashing down, but I knew it was necessary. Mindy cut Jenna out of her life completely. It wasn't easy. Jenna didn't go quietly. She showed up at Mindy's work, blew up her phone with messages, and even tried to break into her apartment. We had to get a restraining order to make her back off. Just when we thought it was over, things took an even darker turn. One night, we came home to find our apartment trashed. Everything was destroyed, furniture overturned, pictures smashed, clothes shredded. On the wall, written in what looked like red paint, was a message: "If I can't have her, no one can." We called the police, but Jenna was nowhere to be found. She'd vanished without a trace. We spent the next few weeks looking over our shoulders, jumping at every sound. The stress was taking its toll on both of us. Then, out of the blue, Mindy got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of us sleeping in our bed, clearly taken from inside our apartment. The message read, "Sweet dreams." We packed our bags that night and left town. We didn't tell anyone where we were going, not even our families. We just drove, putting as much distance between us and Jenna as possible. For months, we lived like fugitives moving from place to place, always looking over our shoulders. We changed our names, our appearances, our entire lives. It was exhausting, but we felt like we had no choice. Just when we thought we might be safe, I spotted a familiar black car in the parking lot of our latest motel. My heart sank. How about she found us? We ran again, but this time Jenna was always one step behind us. It was like she could read our minds, anticipating our every move. The chase seemed never-ending. Finally, we decided to make a stand. We were tired of running, tired of living in fear. We rented a remote cabin and waited for Jenna to show up. We knew she would eventually. 3 days later, we heard a car pull up outside. This was it. The moment of truth. We had no idea how it would end, but we were ready to face whatever came next. As the doorknob slowly turned, we braced ourselves for the confrontation we'd been dreading and anticipating for so long. Whatever happened next, we knew our lives would never be the same. I never thought I'd be in this situation. 2 years with SG seemed like a dream at first. We met through mutual friends, hit it off immediately, and soon became inseparable. He was charming and attentive, and always knew how to make me laugh. But as time went on, things started to change. It was subtle at first. He'd ask where I was going, who I was with. Normal stuff, right? But then he started getting upset if I didn't answer his calls right away or if I went out without him. He'd make comments about my clothes, suggesting I change into something more appropriate. Before I knew it, I was constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of upsetting him. After months of this, I finally gathered the courage to end things. I sat him down and explained that his behavior was too controlling, that I needed my space. To my surprise, he took it well. He apologized, said he understood, and we agreed to remain friends. I felt relieved, thinking the worst was behind me. But that relief didn't last long. A few days after our breakup, I noticed odd things happening. My spare key, which I'd hidden under a potted plant, was suddenly on my kitchen counter. I could have sworn I'd moved it, but there it was. Then I started seeing SG everywhere. At the grocery store, my favorite coffee shop, even outside my workplace. Each time he'd act like it was a coincidence, but something felt off. The real shock came when I ran into our mutual friend, Sarah. She asked how things were going with SJ, and I told her we'd broken up. She looked confused and said she'd just had dinner with both of us last week. My heart sank. I hadn't seen Sarah in over a month. That's when I realized SJ was acting as if we were still together. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, bringing takeout or movies like he used to. When I reminded him we'd broken up, he'd look at me strangely and say I must be stressed from work. He'd insist we never actually ended things. I started doubting myself. Had I dreamed up the breakup conversation? Was I losing my mind? I tried talking to other friends, but many of them seemed to believe we were still a couple. SJ had been telling everyone we were just going through a rough patch. My world started to feel surreal. I'd come home to find things moved around in my apartment. My social media accounts would show posts I didn't remember making, all about how happy SJ and I were together. When I changed my passwords, he somehow got the new ones. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. SJ was everywhere, always smiling, always acting like everything was normal. But nothing was normal. I was losing grip on reality, questioning my own memories and decisions. I tried to confront him, to make him understand it was over, but he'd just look at me with concern, telling me I was working too hard and needed rest. He'd offer to take care of me, to help me get better. His kindness felt sinister, a mask hiding something darker. My friends and family started worrying about me. They'd say I was acting strange, pushing SJ away for no reason. Some suggested I see a therapist, thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. But how could I explain that the breakdown was because of SJ, not despite him? I felt like I was drowning with no one to turn to. Every attempt to assert the truth of our breakup was met with disbelief or concern for my mental health. SJ had crafted a reality where we were still together, and somehow everyone but me was living in it. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake, jumping at every sound, wondering if SJ was in my apartment. During the day, I'd constantly look over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. My work suffered, my relationships strained. I was a shell of my former self. In desperation, I reached out to a domestic violence hotline. The woman on the other end listened patiently as I poured out my story. For the first time in weeks, someone believed me. She called it gaslighting, a form of emotional abuse where the abuser manipulates their victim into questioning their own sanity. Armed with this knowledge, I started to fight back. I documented everything, every unexpected appearance, every manipulated social media post, every gaslighting comment. I installed security cameras in my apartment and started recording our conversations. Slowly, I began to reclaim my reality. I showed the evidence to my closest friends, helping them see the truth. I changed my locks, blocked SJ on every platform, and even considered moving to a new city. It wasn't easy. SJ's behavior escalated when he realized he was losing control. He'd alternate between playing the victim, accusing me of abandoning him, and making veiled threats about what would happen if I kept pushing him away. But I stood my ground. With the support of a therapist and a small circle of friends who now understood the situation, I started to rebuild my life. I learned to trust my own perceptions again, to recognize manipulation for what it was. Just when I thought I was making progress, SJ upped his game. He somehow managed to get a job at my workplace. Suddenly, he was there every day, acting like the perfect colleague, winning over my coworkers. I felt cornered with nowhere to escape. I decided to take drastic action. I quit my job, packed my essentials, and left town without telling anyone where I was going. It was terrifying starting over in a new city with no support system, but it felt like my only option. For a while, I thought I was free. I found a new job, made new friends, and started to feel like myself again. But then 6 months later, I saw him. SJ was across the street, staring right at me. My blood ran cold. How had he found me? I ran home, locked all the doors, and called the police. They came but found no sign of SJ. They suggested I might have been mistaken, but I knew what I saw. He was here in my new city, ready to start the nightmare all over again. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Welcome home, sweetheart. I've missed you." I knew then that this was far from over. SJ wasn't just an ex who couldn't let go. He was something far more dangerous, far more determined. I realized I couldn't keep running. It was time to face this head. I reached out to a private investigator determined to uncover how SJ was tracking me, how he was manipulating everyone around us. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. This time, I was going to fight back and I was going to win. As I sit here, planning my next move, I can't help but feel a mix of fear and determination. I don't know what SJ will do next, but I know one thing for certain: this ends now, one way or another. The game of cat and mouse is over. It's time for the mouse to become the hunter. I never saw it coming. Nathan and I had been together for almost 3 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. We met at a local coffee shop, bonding over our shared love of obscure indie bands and horror movies. He was charming, attentive, and seemed like the perfect catch. Our relationship progressed quickly. Nathan was always surprising me with thoughtful gestures, flowers on random Tuesdays, planning weekend getaways to quaint bed and breakfasts. We talked about moving in together, even started looking at apartments. I really thought I found the one. Looking back, there were red flags I chose to ignore. Nathan traveled frequently for work, often unreachable for days at a time. He was vague about his past and family, changing the subject when I asked too many questions. I chalked it up to him being independent and career-focused. I never pushed too hard when he was evasive about certain topics. Everything changed last month. I was at Nathan's place, helping him search for an important work document he'd misplaced. While digging through some files in his home office, I stumbled upon a stack of photos. My heart nearly stopped as I flipped through picture after picture of Nathan with another woman and 2 young children. It was clearly a family, his family. I confronted Nathan as soon as he got home that evening. At first, he tried to lie, claiming they were old photos of his sister's family. But I met his sister before, and this wasn't her. After I kept pressing, Nathan finally broke down and admitted the truth. He had a wife and 2 kids living in a town about an hour away. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. The man I thought I knew had been living a double life our entire relationship. He'd been carefully crafting lies to keep both me and his wife in the dark. I felt physically ill thinking about all the times he told me he was away on business when he was really with his family. Nathan begged me not to leave him. He swore he was miserable in his marriage and had been planning to leave his wife. He promised he'd end things with her and move in with me like we talked about. Part of me wanted to believe him, but I knew I could never trust him again after such a massive betrayal. I told Nathan I needed time to process everything. That weekend, I did some digging online and managed to find his wife's contact information. I was torn about whether to reach out to her, but ultimately decided she deserved to know the truth. When I called Nathan's wife, Sarah, she was understandably shocked and upset. As we talked, we realized Nathan had been telling us the exact same lies and making the same promises to both of us. He'd sworn to Sarah that he was going to leave me for her, just like he told me about her. We were both caught in his web of deception, unsure of who he really planned to stay with. Sarah and I decided to meet in person. It was surreal sitting across from this woman who I'd never known existed, but whose life was so intertwined with mine. We pieced together the elaborate lies Nathan had used to keep us both in the dark for years. The more we talked, the more we realized how skilled Nathan was at emotional manipulation. He carefully crafted his lies to play on both of our insecurities and fears. With me, he acted commitment-phobic to explain why he wasn't ready to fully settle down. With Sarah, he claimed to feel trapped and unfulfilled in their marriage. He knew exactly what to say to keep us both emotionally dependent on him. As Sarah and I compared notes, we uncovered the full extent of Nathan's deception. He created elaborate fake business trips and work events to explain his absences to both of us. He had separate phones and email accounts to keep his communications separate. Nathan even had a network of friends who helped cover for him, pretending to be coworkers or clients when needed. We were both terrified of Nathan's reaction when he found out we'd been talking. He'd shown flashes of a nasty temper when confronted about his lies. We worried he might lash out or try to turn us against each other somehow. Neither of us was sure what to do next. Sarah had built a life and family with Nathan, but now knew it was all based on lies. I'd wasted years of my life on a relationship that was never real. We were both struggling to come to terms with the fact that the man we loved never truly existed. As Sarah and I continued to unravel Nathan's web of lies, we made a shocking discovery. Nathan had a third girlfriend in another nearby town. We found evidence of yet another separate life he'd been maintaining, complete with fake social media profiles and a rented apartment. Realizing the true scope of Nathan's deception made my head spin. How had he managed to juggle 3 separate lives for so long without getting caught? The level of planning and manipulation required was staggering. Sarah and I reached out to Nathan's third girlfriend, Amy. She was just as blindsided as we had been. The 3 of us met up, forming an unlikely alliance as we tried to make sense of the situation we found ourselves in. As we shared our stories, we realized Nathan had used similar tactics with all of us. He'd isolated each of us from friends and family, making us emotionally dependent on him. Nathan had a talent for identifying our individual insecurities and exploiting them to keep us under his control. We all struggled with feelings of shame and embarrassment for falling for Nathan's lies. But as we talked, we realized how skillfully he had manipulated us. Nathan was like a chameleon, becoming exactly what each of us needed to keep us hooked. The 3 of us decided to confront Nathan together. We arranged to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown. When Nathan walked in and saw all 3 of us sitting there, the color drained from his face. He tried to turn and run, but we blocked his exit. For the next 2 hours, we took turns confronting Nathan about his lies and manipulation. He tried every trick in his playbook, crying, pleading, anger, promises to change. But with the 3 of us united, his manipulations fell flat. In that coffee shop, we watched Nathan's carefully constructed world crumble around him. The mask he'd worn for so long finally slipped, revealing the true narcissist underneath. As Nathan realized he'd lost control of the situation, he became increasingly erratic and desperate. Just when we thought the confrontation was winding down, Nathan made a last-ditch effort to regain control. He pulled out his phone, threatening to release embarrassing photos and information about all of us if we didn't agree to keep quiet about what he'd done. But we stood firm, refusing to let Nathan manipulate us any longer. We left that coffee shop feeling shaken but empowered. For the first time in years, we were free from Nathan's web of lies and deceit. I met Chelsea at a friend's party 2 years ago. She was funny, smart, and gorgeous. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. We started dating soon after, and things were amazing at first. Chelsea was attentive and affectionate. She always wanted to spend time together and made me feel special. I thought I found the one. Looking back, there were some early red flags I ignored. Chelsea would forget her wallet and ask me to cover dinner or drinks. She'd need to borrow my car for errands that took hours longer than expected. Small amounts of cash would go missing from my wallet. I brushed it off, figuring couples share things. About 6 months in, the requests ramped up. Chelsea lost her job and asked to borrow larger sums of money for rent and bills. She said it was temporary until she found a new job. I wanted to be supportive, so I agreed. Weeks turned into months with no new job in sight. Chelsea claimed she was looking, but seemed to spend most days at my place watching TV. I started feeling drained, emotionally and financially. Chelsea became very clingy, getting upset if I wanted alone time or to see friends without her. She'd text constantly when we were apart. If I didn't respond right away, she'd call repeatedly and guilt-trip me. My friends noticed the changes in me. I was always tired and stressed about money. I stopped showing up to our usual hangouts. When I did make plans, Chelsea would create some crisis or conflict to make me cancel. She claimed to be sick or say we had other obligations I'd forgotten about. Chelsea slowly inserted herself into every aspect of my life. She befriended my coworkers and started showing up at my office unannounced. She convinced me to give her access to my work calendar so she could coordinate our schedules. In reality, she used it to control my time and know my whereabouts. I barely saw my family anymore. Chelsea always had an excuse for why we couldn't visit them. She'd pick fights before planned trips, leaving me too emotionally exhausted to go, or she'd suddenly get sick at the last minute. My mom sensed something was off, but Chelsea had charmed her initially. I downplayed my doubts, not wanting to admit there were problems. As the months went on, Chelsea's true nature emerged more clearly. She had a mean streak, making cruel comments about my appearance or intelligence. But she'd follow it with effusive apologies and affection, leaving me confused. She'd jokingly threaten to share embarrassing photos if I ever left her. Her mood swings were unpredictable. I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Chelsea pushed for access to my bank accounts and credit cards, claiming it would be easier to manage our expenses together. When I hesitated, she exploded in anger, accusing me of not trusting her. I relented, hoping it would smooth things over. Soon my savings were drained and my credit maxed out. I finally reached my breaking point when Chelsea accidentally deleted all my female contacts from my phone. She'd been going through it while I showered. I confronted her and said I needed space to think about our relationship. Chelsea flew into a rage, screaming and throwing things. She threatened to tell everyone I'd been abusing her if I left. I felt trapped and didn't know what to do. Chelsea had systematically isolated me from my support network. She painted herself as the perfect girlfriend to my friends and family. Who would believe me if I told the truth now? I confided in my best friend, hoping for advice. To my shock, he said Chelsea had already told him I was emotionally abusive and controlling. She'd been laying the groundwork to discredit me for months. My friend urged me to get help and said Chelsea had shown him texts of me threatening her. I knew they were faked, but it was my word against hers. Chelsea had gathered personal and financial information she could use against me. She knew secrets about my family I had never told anyone else. She had access to my accounts and work credentials. The thought of trying to untangle myself from her was overwhelming. I decided to start secretly documenting Chelsea's behavior. I installed hidden cameras in my apartment and recorded our conversations. I saved her threatening texts and emails. I tracked my finances meticulously, noting every unauthorized charge and withdrawal. As I gathered evidence, I also worked on rebuilding my support network. I reached out to old friends, explaining that I'd been in a controlling relationship. Some were skeptical at first, but as I shared more details, they began to understand. I reconnected with my family, gradually opening up about the situation. I consulted a lawyer to understand my options. They advised me on how to protect myself legally and financially. I started slowly moving money to a new secret account. I changed passwords and security questions on all my accounts. Chelsea sensed something was off. She became even more controlling and volatile. She demanded to know where I was every minute of the day. She'd show up at my work unannounced, causing scenes. She threatened to reveal embarrassing secrets to my boss if I didn't quit my job to spend more time with her. I knew I had to act fast. With my lawyer's help, I filed for a restraining order based on the evidence I gathered. The day it was granted, I had the locks changed on my apartment and blocked Chelsea's number. Chelsea didn't go quietly. She showed up at my workplace, screaming accusations. She contacted my friends and family, spinning elaborate lies about my behavior. She even created fake social media accounts to harass me online. But I was prepared. I shared the evidence I gathered with those close to me, helping them see the truth. I worked with my bank to dispute the fraudulent charges Chelsea had made. I alerted my company's HR department about the situation, and they were supportive. Slowly, I started to reclaim my life. I moved to a new apartment where Chelsea couldn't find me. I focused on my work and rekindled old friendships. I started therapy to process the emotional trauma of the relationship. It wasn't easy. There were days I doubted myself, wondered if I'd overreacted. Chelsea's voice in my head told me I'd never find anyone else that I needed her. But with time and support, those thoughts faded. A year after leaving Chelsea, I ran into her at a coffee shop. My heart raced, but I stood my ground. She tried to engage me, alternating between apologies and subtle threats. I simply said, "Please respect the restraining order," and walked away. As I left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was finally free. 3 years ago, life was pretty sweet. Yuri and I were in a good place, comfortable and happy. We had our routine, our favorite spots, and a solid group of friends. Everything felt right. Then, out of the blue, Derry landed this amazing new job. At first, I was thrilled for her. It was a big step up, and she was so excited. But looking back, that's when things started to change. It began slowly. She'd come home later talking about new colleagues and after-work drinks. No big deal, I thought. It's normal to make new friends at a new job. I encouraged her, glad she was fitting in so well. But then the changes picked up speed. Suddenly, our usual weekend plans were being replaced by mysterious outings with her new crowd. She'd be vague about where she was going or who she'd be with. When I asked, she'd brush it off, saying it was just work stuff. Her style changed too. Gone were the comfy sweaters and jeans. Now it was all sleek, dark clothes and weird symbols I didn't recognize. She started wearing this odd pendant all the time, never taking it off, even with sleep. I tried to roll with it. People change, right? But I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. The Derry I knew was disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized. One night, she came home at 3 a.m., eyes wild, talking a mile a minute about energy fields and hidden truths. I was worried sick, but when I tried to talk to her about it, she got defensive. Told me I wouldn't understand, that I wasn't awakened yet. That's when the paranoia started. She checked the windows constantly, convinced someone was watching us. She'd whisper about them and how they were trying to control everything. When I asked who they were, she'd just shake her head and say I wasn't ready to know. I was losing her and I didn't know what to do. Our friends noticed too. They'd ask me what was going on with Derry, why she never hung out anymore. I had no answers. Then came the night that really scared me. I woke up at 2 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. I found her in the living room, surrounded by candles, chanting in some language I didn't recognize. When I called her name, she looked at me with eyes that weren't hers. Cold, distant eyes that made my blood run cold. I knew I had to do something. I started digging, trying to find out who these new friends were. It wasn't easy. Derry had become incredibly secretive, password protecting everything, and always clearing her browser history. But I got lucky. She left her phone unlocked one day, and I saw a message about a meeting, an address, a time, and a cryptic symbol. I knew it was wrong, but I had to know. So I followed her. The place was this old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I watched from across the street as Derry and about 20 others filed in. They were all dressed in black, wearing that same pendant Derry never took off. I waited for hours, heart pounding. When they finally came out, Derry looked different, dazed, almost euphoric. The others were the same. They hugged and touched each other in this weird, intimate way that made me uncomfortable. That's when I saw him. This tall guy with long hair and intense eyes. He was clearly the leader. The way the others deferred to him, the way Derry looked at him with complete adoration, it made me sick. I followed Derry home, revealed myself when we got there. The fight that followed was ugly. She accused me of spying, but not trusting her. I pleaded with her to see reason to realize she was in a cult, but she wouldn't hear it. She told me I was blind, that I was holding her back from her true potential. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Derry became more erratic, more paranoid. She'd stay out for days at a time. then come back babbling about cosmic energies and impending doom. When she was home, she'd alternate between trying to convert me and accusing me of being an agent of them. I tried everything. Talked to her family, her old friends, but she'd cut ties with most of them. Though she still talked to her worried sick, but didn't know what to do either. One night, I came home to find Derry packing a bag. She said the group was leaving town, going to their true home. My heart sank. I knew if she left with them, I might never see her again. In desperation, I blurted out everything I'd learned about the group, how they were manipulating her, isolating her from everyone who cared about her. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. But then her phone buzzed. A message from the leader. Whatever it said, it snapped her back. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. I tried to stop her, but she shoved past me. I couldn't let her go. I followed her to an old bus station. The whole group was there, loading up an old school bus. I watched from behind a pillar as Derry approached the leader. He embraced her, whispered something in her ear. Suddenly, Derry stiffened. She looked around, confused. Then her eyes met mine. In that moment, I saw recognition, fear, and a silent plea for help. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran towards her, calling her name. The group turned, startled. The leader's face contorted with rage. He grabbed Derry's arm, trying to pull her onto the bus. But Derry resisted. She twisted free and ran towards me. We collided in a desperate embrace as chaos erupted around us. The group was shouting, some trying to grab Derry, others running for the bus. In the confusion, we managed to slip away. We ran until we couldn't anymore, collapsing in a nearby park. Derry was shaking, crying, apologizing over and over. I just held her, relieved beyond words to have her back. The next few days were a blur. We went to the police, told them everything. They found the warehouse, uncovered evidence of all sorts of illegal activities. The leader and several others were arrested, but many group members disappeared. Derry struggled with withdrawal symptoms from whatever they'd been giving her. She had nightmares, panic attacks, but slowly, day by day, she started to come back to herself. It's been a few months now. Things aren't perfect. Derry's still dealing with the trauma, still piecing together exactly what happened to her. But she's getting help, and we're working through it together. Sometimes at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, terrified that it was all a dream and she's gone again. But then I feel her next to me, safe and sound, and I can breathe again. We don't know what the future holds, but we're facing it together, stronger for what we've been through. And every day I'm grateful that I didn't give up, that I fought for her. Because sometimes love really can conquer all, even a cult. For a long time, everything was perfect. We moved in together, adopted a cat, and even started talking about marriage. But lately, things had started feeling off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, just little things that didn't add up. Frank would say he was working late, but I'd see his car in the driveway when I got home. He'd get defensive if I picked up his phone to check the time. He'd disappear for hours without explanation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Everyone needs privacy, right? But as weeks passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Frank became more distant and irritable. He'd snap at me over little things, then apologize profusely. His mood swings worsened. One night, I woke up to find Frank's side of the bed empty. It was 3 a.m. Worried, I went looking for him. I found him in the bathroom, hunched over the sink. When he turned around, his pupils were huge. That's my new. Frank was using drugs. I confronted him the next day. Frank broke down crying, admitting he'd been struggling with cocaine addiction for months. He swore he wanted to get clean, begged me not to leave him. I was devastated but determined to help. I helped Frank find a rehab program and went with him to support groups. For a while, things seemed to improve. Frank was going to meetings and seeing a therapist, but I still felt uneasy. Something still didn't feel right. Frank remained secretive with his phone, still disappearing at odd hours. One day, I came home early from work and found Frank frantically shoving something under the couch cushions. When I asked what it was, he got angry and stormed out. After he left, I looked under the cushions and found a bag of white powder. My heart sank. That night, I confronted Frank again. This time, he didn't cry or apologize. He got defensive, accusing me of spying on him. He said I was suffocating him, that he was an adult who could make his own choices. I was shocked by his change in attitude. This wasn't the Frank I knew. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled further. Frank stopped going to meetings. He'd stay out all night and come home looking terrible. I found strange charges on our shared credit card, thousands of dollars withdrawn from ATMs in sketchy parts of town. I tried everything I could think of to help him. I called his family, his friends, begging them to intervene. But Frank pushed everyone away. He accused me of turning people against him. He became paranoid, thinking everyone was out to get him. One night, Frank came home in a panic. He was sweating and shaking, looking over his shoulder. He told me he owed some dangerous people a lot of money. He begged me to give him my savings, promising he'd pay me back. I refused. Frank flew into a rage, throwing things and punching holes in the walls. I had never seen him like this before. I was terrified. The next day, I came home to find our apartment ransacked. My jewelry was gone, along with our TV and laptops. Frank was nowhere to be found. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. That's when I saw the note on the fridge. "I'm sorry. I'll fix this. Don't look for me." I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? What if Frank was in real danger? I felt responsible somehow, like I should have seen this coming or done more to help him. Days went by with no word from Frank. I was a wreck, imagining all the horrible things that could have happened to him. Then one night, there was a pounding on my door. It was Frank, but he looked terrible, bruised, and bloody. He stumbled into the apartment, babbling about owing money to some very bad people. Before I could process what was happening, there was more pounding on the door. Angry voices shouted from the hallway. Frank panicked, looking for somewhere to hide. My mind raced. What had Frank gotten us into? In that moment, I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep trying to save Frank, to fix things for him. But at what cost? How far was I willing to go? How much danger was I willing to put myself in for someone who didn't seem to want help? As the pounding on the door grew louder, I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed Frank's arm and pulled him towards the fire escape. We climbed down as quietly as we could, hearts pounding. Once on the ground, we ran through dark alleys, trying to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. We ended up at a C motel in the outskirts of town. I used cash to get a room, not wanting to leave a paper trail. As we sat in the dimly lit room, Frank finally broke down and told me everything. He'd gotten involved with a dangerous drug ring, thinking he could make some quick money to pay off his debts. But things had spiraled out of control, and now he owed them more than he could ever repay. I listened in horror as Frank explained the extent of his involvement. I realized that by helping him escape, I had now made myself an accomplice. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon him despite everything he'd done. Over the next few days, we moved from motel to motel, always looking over our shoulders. I withdrew all the money I could from my accounts, knowing we couldn't use credit cards without being traced. I called in sick to work, making up excuses. I knew I was throwing my life away, but I felt trapped. Frank swore he had a plan to make things right, to pay off his debts and get us both to safety. But my trust in him was shattered. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Every noise made me jump. Every stranger on the street looked like a potential threat. As we sat in yet another dingy motel room, I realized how far I had fallen. I'd lost my job, my home, my sense of security, all for someone who had lied to me repeatedly. I looked at Frank, passed out on the bed, and knew I had to make a decision. Stay with him and continue down this dangerous path, or find a way out on my own. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed a number I never thought I'd have to use. As it rang, I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change my life forever. After almost 2 years together, Peter finally introduced me to his family. I was excited but nervous. Meeting the parents is always a big step. To my relief, they were warm and welcoming. His mom hugged me tight, and his dad cracked jokes. His siblings were friendly too. I left feeling like I'd passed some kind of test. At first, everything seemed normal. We have dinner with his family once a week. They'd invite us to barbecues and game nights. It was nice to feel included. But slowly, things started to change. His mom would call multiple times a day to check in. If we missed a family dinner, there'd be guilt trips about how we were abandoning them. Peter's family had a lot of traditions and expectations. They wanted us at every holiday, birthday, and random family gathering. If we had other plans, they'd act hurt and upset. Peter always gave in to keep the peace. I started feeling like we had no time for just us anymore. Then came the suggestions about our lifestyle. His mom didn't approve of my job and kept pushing me to quit. She'd send links to job postings she thought were more suitable. His dad criticized our apartment and insisted we needed to move to a better neighborhood. They even started talking about us all living together in a big family home. I tried to brush it off at first. Every family has quirks, right? But it kept getting worse. They'd show up at our place unannounced. They had opinions on everything from what we ate to how we decorated. Peter just went along with it all to avoid conflict. The real turning point came when I got a job offer in another city. It was a great opportunity, but Peter's family freaked out. They said we couldn't possibly move away from them. His mom cried and said we were tearing the family apart. His dad threatened to cut Peter off financially if we left. I was shocked when Peter turned down the job without even discussing it with me. He said family had to come first. That's when I realized how deep their control went. Peter couldn't make any decisions without their approval. Things got worse after that. His family started planning our whole lives. They talked about when we should get married, have kids, buy a house, all according to their timeline. If I disagreed, they'd act like I was being selfish and unreasonable. I felt trapped. It wasn't just about Peter anymore. It was his entire family. They saw me as an extension of him, not my own person. My opinions didn't matter unless they aligned with theirs. I was losing myself trying to fit into their world. Whenever I tried to talk to Peter about it, he'd get defensive. He couldn't see how controlling they were. To him, it was normal. He'd say I just needed to try harder to fit in. But the more I tried, the more miserable I became. I started to pull away, making excuses to skip family events. They noticed and doubled down on the guilt trips. Peter's mom would call crying, saying I was driving a wedge between them. His siblings would text asking why I hated the family. It was exhausting. The final straw came when Peter's parents announced they'd put a down payment on a house for us, right next door to them. They hadn't even asked us. Peter was thrilled, but I felt sick. I realized then that there was no future where I could be happy in this relationship. I decided to leave, but it wasn't that simple. When I told Peter, he panicked. He begged me to reconsider, promising things would change. I stood my ground, but he wouldn't accept it. He called his family, and suddenly they were all involved. His mom showed up at our apartment, crying and pleading with me to stay. She said I was breaking Peter's heart and destroying the family. His dad was angry, accusing me of using Peter and being ungrateful for everything they'd done for us. Even his siblings got involved, sending me long messages about how selfish I was being. I tried to pack my things, but Peter wouldn't let me be alone. He followed me from room to room, alternating between begging and guilt-tripping. His family members kept showing up, each taking turns trying to convince me to stay. It felt like I was being held hostage in my own home. I reached out to my friend Sarah for help. When she came to pick me up, Peter's family blocked her car in the driveway. They refused to let her in, saying this was a family matter. I had to sneak out the back door with whatever I could carry in one bag. Even after I left, they wouldn't leave me alone. They bombarded me with calls and messages. Some were angry, calling me names and making threats. Others were sad, begging me to come back and fix the family. Peter's mom even showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in front of my coworkers. I had to change my phone number and block them on social media. I stayed with Sarah for a while, afraid they might show up at my apartment. It felt like I was in hiding from my own life. Weeks passed and things slowly started to calm down. I thought it was finally over. Then one day, I came home to find Peter sitting at my doorstep. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. He said he left his family's house and realized how controlling they'd been. He swore things would be different if I gave him another chance. For a moment, I wavered. Part of me still cared for Peter and wanted to believe him, but then I saw his mom's car parked down the street, and I knew nothing had really changed. This was just another tactic to draw me back in. I told Peter to leave, and that I'd call the police if he or his family contacted me again. As I closed the door, I heard his mom yelling from her car. I leaned against the door, heart pounding, realizing how close I'd come to being pulled back into their web. That night, I booked a one-way ticket to another state. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Sarah. As the plane took off, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. I was leaving behind everything I knew, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't know what the future held, but at least it would be my future, not one dictated by Peter's family. As the city lights faded below me, I took a deep breath and smiled. This was the first day of my new life, and I was ready for whatever came next. We met through friends, hit it off, and quickly became inseparable. She was smart, funny, and seemed to really get me. I thought I found my perfect match. The first red flag popped up when I missed an important work meeting. I could have sworn I'd put it in my calendar, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Penn was sympathetic, telling me not to worry. I brushed it off as a one-time mistake. But then it kept happening. I forget plans with friends, misplace important documents, and show up on the wrong day for appointments. Each time, Penn was there to comfort me and help sort things out. She teased me about being scatterbrained, but in a sweet way that made me feel like she had my back. As weeks passed, I started feeling increasingly anxious and unsure of myself. My usually sharp memory seemed to be failing me more and more. I began double and triple checking everything, afraid I'd mess up again. Penn noticed and suggested I see a doctor concerned about my health. The doctor found nothing wrong, which was both a relief and frustrating. If there wasn't a medical explanation, why was this happening? I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. That's when I noticed other strange things. My email inbox would be mysteriously empty of important messages I knew I'd received. Passwords for my accounts would suddenly stop working. Even my work performance began to slip. Projects I was sure I completed would somehow be unfinished or full of errors. Through it all, Penn was my rock. She'd help me reconstruct timelines, find misplaced items, and reassure me that everything would be okay. I became increasingly reliant on her to keep my life in order. She even offered to manage my calendar and emails to help me stay on top of things. A small part of me started to wonder if Penn was somehow involved. The thought seemed crazy. Why would she do that? She loved me and only wanted to help. I pushed the suspicion aside, feeling guilty for even considering it. Then came the day I stumbled across an old phone I'd forgotten about. Out of curiosity, I charged it up and was shocked to find a trove of emails, calendar entries, and notes that I thought I'd lost or forgotten. As I scrolled through them, a chill ran down my spine. Everything was there. All the appointments I'd missed, the work deadlines I'd blown, the plans with friends I'd forgotten. With growing horror, I realized that Penn had been systematically erasing and altering my digital life. She gained access to my accounts and had been slowly, methodically gaslighting me for months. All those times she'd helped me find things or remember events, she'd been the one hiding them in the first place. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started paying closer attention to her actions, secretly documenting everything. I noticed how she'd casually mention plans we'd supposedly made, only to act surprised when I couldn't remember. She'd find important documents in places I'd already searched multiple times. She even started subtly criticizing my memory to our friends, setting up a narrative of me being forgetful. One night, I pretended to go to bed early but actually stayed up, watching her through a crack in the bedroom door. To my shock, I saw her go through my work bag, removing papers and replacing them with slightly altered versions. She then logged into my laptop, deleting emails and changing calendar entries. The next day, I set up hidden cameras in our apartment. Over the next week, I gathered irrefutable evidence of her manipulations. I saw her hiding my keys and finding them for me later. She deleted text messages from my phone while I was in the shower. She even called my boss pretending to be me, saying I was sick when I was perfectly fine. Armed with this evidence, I finally confronted her. Her reaction was chilling. Instead of denying it or showing remorse, she calmly explained that she'd done it all for me to make me see how much I needed her. In her twisted logic, by breaking me down, she was actually making our relationship stronger. I ended things on the spot, but Penn didn't take it well. She threatened to tell everyone that I was mentally unstable, using all the groundwork she'd laid over the past months. She said no one would believe me over her. Luckily, I had prepared for this. I had already reached out to my closest friends and family, showing them the evidence I gathered. They were shocked but supportive. I also contacted a lawyer who helped me navigate the process of protecting myself legally. The next few months were tough. Penn tried to smear my reputation, but the evidence spoke for itself. I had to change all my passwords, get new accounts, and even move to a new apartment to feel safe. Therapy helped me process the trauma and rebuild my self-trust. Gradually, things got better. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during my relationship with Penn. My work performance improved as I regained confidence in my abilities. I even started dating again, though I was much more cautious this time. 1 year after the breakup, I received a letter from Penn. She'd been in therapy too and wanted to apologize. Part of me was curious to hear her out, but I knew engaging with her again would be dangerous. I chose to leave that chapter of my life firmly closed. Today, I'm in a much better place. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, self-reliance, and the importance of maintaining connections outside of a romantic relationship. I'm more aware of manipulation tactics and better equipped to spot red flags early on. But the most important lesson was learning to trust myself again. Now, when something feels off, I pay attention to that feeling. I've realized that my intuition is usually right, and I'm not afraid to act on it. This experience, as horrible as it was, ultimately made me stronger and wiser, and that's something pen could never take away from me.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.